Hi, my name is Chris and this is Battle Nonsense. In video games we have two different kinds of lag. There is the input lag, which is the time the game needs to respond to your input, like the press of a button on your controller. And then there's the network lag, which is the time the game's network data needs to travel between the players when you play online. So a lag-free experience is what we want, especially in one-on-one fighting games. But it's important to understand that nothing can be completely free of lag. You will always have input and network lag in your game because the game needs time to process your input and draw the next image on your screen. And in a multiplayer game your data needs time to reach the other player through the internet, and then this data also needs to get processed by the other client. So there will always be lag that you can't do anything about. For the developers this presents the challenge to keep the lag as low as possible, because too much lag will kill the player's experience. In highly competitive games it will also turn the game into a gamble, which means that it's no longer a competitive game. So today we will have a look at the input and network lag in Ultra Street Fighter 4, Street Fighter 5, Mortal Kombat X and Skullgirls. Now to measure the input lag I use a camera that records at 1200 frames per second, a PC with a 144Hz gaming monitor and the Xbox One controller, which I connected to the PC using an USB cable. I have also directly connected a LED to the controller, which will light up when I press a button. So all I have to do is review that recorded footage and look for that frame where I see the LED light up. And then I count the frames until the character on the monitor responds to the press of the button. And this will then tell me how much input lag the game has. Factors that have a high impact on the input lag are v-sync, the refresh rate of the monitor, and the frame rate at which the game is running. In all tests the games ran at 1080p and 144Hz, while the frame rate was locked at 60, which is common for fighting games. V-sync is a bit of a special topic in this video, because the config section in Street Fighter 5 does not include an option to turn it off. However, you can get rid of it by directly editing a config file. In the description down below you can find the link to the tutorial I used to turn it off for this test. Now let's have a look at the input lag when two players fight against each other on the same PC. In Street Fighter 5 the worst measured input lag was 145 milliseconds. The lag that I measured most of the time was around 137 milliseconds, and 133 milliseconds was the lowest measured input lag. Instead of just calculating the average delay from those 20 tests I did, I chose to show you the value that I measured most of the time during those 20 tests, because that's what the player actually had to deal with most of the time. So that's with v-sync enabled. Now, when we look at the results from the test where I disabled it in the config file, then we can clearly see how that reduces the input lag, which means that the game becomes more responsive. Now let's compare that to other fighting games which all had v-sync disabled during the tests. So even when you disable v-sync in the config file of Street Fighter 5, it still shows the highest input lag of all those games. I honestly did not expect that outcome when I began with these tests, because Street Fighter is a highly competitive franchise. Another surprise was how low the input lag is in Mortal Kombat X and Skullgirls. Now, what does the input lag look like when I play online? To test that, we used the same setup as before, but now player 2 will play on his own PC. Both players use their own fiber internet connection, but the ping between the players is just 1 millisecond because they use the same internet service provider. This means that we basically have no network lag here, as fighting games do not use dedicated servers. One of the players is the host. So just like before, I wait for the LED to light up in the recorded 1200 frames per second footage, and then I count the frames until my character carries out that action of that button press. Street Fighter 5 shows pretty much the same results for the input lag when you play online, at least until you disable v-sync. Compared to playing locally, the online input lag is about 33 milliseconds longer, which means 2 frames at 60 frames per second. Ultra Street Fighter 4 shows pretty much identical values when playing online, while the input lag in Mortal Kombat X increased by 69 milliseconds, which are 4 frames at 60 frames per second. Skullgirls on the other hand shows pretty much the same input lag when you play online against an opponent to which you have a ping of 1 millisecond and use the suggested GGPO value of 0. If you would use 2 instead of 0, then the input lag increases by 38 milliseconds, which are 2 frames at 60 frames per second. Now let's have a look at the network lag, which will also help us to explain those increased input lag times. So to measure the network lag I use a camera that records at 400 frames per second, 2 PCs and 2 144Hz gaming monitors. What affects the network lag the most is the distance between the devices. So the bigger the distance between two network devices, the longer the data needs to reach its destination. Here it does not make a difference if you have a 1 or a 100 megabit connection, because the data rate has no effect on the speed at which data travels through the fiber or copper cables. This data travel time is where the term ping comes into play, which is the round-trip time of your network data. So a low ping means that you have less lag, because the data reaches the other player faster. So as I said before, each of these PCs is connected to the internet through separate fiber internet connections, and there's just 1 millisecond network lag between these PCs since they use the same internet service provider and because a player becomes the host in fighting games, as there is no dedicated server that both connect to and play on. Now, the monitor on the left is from player 2 that I play against online, and the monitor on the right is my player 1, who is also the host. I will now press a button on the controller of player 1 and then look at the recorded footage to find out how long it takes until I see that punch on the left monitor of player 2. So in Ultra Street Fighter 4 at a ping of 1 millisecond between the players, we cannot see any lag. When I now artificially increase the ping from 1 to 150 milliseconds, then there's still no lag. The punch happens at the same time on both monitors, if not even a bit earlier on the monitor of player 2. So I went a bit crazy and increased the ping to 500 milliseconds, which means that we have a network lag of 250 milliseconds in one direction. But that didn't change anything. What you cannot see here is what I felt when I pressed the button on the controller. When I now reveal the LED that lights up when I press the button on the controller, then it becomes clear what is going on. This is the moment where I press the button in all three cases. So what we see here is that Ultra Street Fighter 4 increases the input lag of the players in order to compensate the network lag. This means the higher the ping, the higher the input lag. This causes that both players see exactly the same at the same time. The obvious downside is that the game becomes less responsive, especially when the network lag or ping goes into the 3 digits. So when we look at the input lag results again, then what we see here is basically how these fighting games compensate lag. Ultra Street Fighter 4 links the input lag to the network lag or ping, and so both players will always see the exact same thing at the exact same time. Street Fighter 5 appears to use a fixed value for the input lag while playing online. This means that the player will begin to see the actions delayed once the network lag goes beyond the artificial input lag, which you can see here in the 100 milliseconds test. And as soon as you have more than 150 milliseconds ping, the animations won't be smooth anymore, which means that you will have troubles playing the game. In Mortal Kombat X, the input lag also increases together with the ping, which means that it uses a system that is similar to the one in Ultra Street Fighter 4. But Mortal Kombat X is less responsive at a ping of 1 millisecond, as its input lag is 36 milliseconds higher than the one in Ultra Street Fighter 4. Skullgirls uses a fixed input lag value for online play like Street Fighter 5, but its GGPO implementation allows the player to choose anything between 0 and 8 frames. It also makes a suggestion which value you should choose based on the ping between the two players. So what can we learn from these tests? Street Fighter 5 really needs a config option to allow players to disable v-sync, because that feature increases the input lag significantly. But even with that disabled, Street Fighter 5 still needs some work, because the local input lag is not just worse than in Ultra Street Fighter 4, it's not even close to the extremely low input lag that Mortal Kombat X and Skullgirls have, which is really strange when you consider the highly competitive level that Street Fighter is played at. So this test project has been quite an adventure and a time-consuming challenge because of how different the lag compensation works in these fighting games compared to how first-person shooters compensate lag. I hope that you enjoyed this video, and if you did, then please give it a like, subscribe for more, and I hope to see you next time. Until then, have a nice day and take care. My name is Chris and this was Battle Nonsense.